Until September 11th, when terrorists rammed a plane into its southwest wall.
In 101, did it crash over there in the Pentagon? Is that correct?
Everything sort of went into slow motion.
Fire all around me, dark all around me.
It was just an horrific crunching thud.
And the smoke billowing for miles.
I don't think I've ever been so afraid.
Confusion.
My priorities got rearranged for the day.
So we watched 15 seconds. It will never leave my mind.
Tonight, on Minute by Minute, the attack on the Pentagon. The Pentagon. The massive building sits on 29 acres just west of the Potomac River, 3 miles from the White House. While most of the nation sleeps, the citadel of American defense is already open for business. Early arrivals walk through the 18 miles of corridors, intersecting 5 rings of concentric hallways. On the C Ring's second floor, Army Legislative Liaison Ted Anderson has just begun his day.
I come in to track what's occurred in Europe. I will monitor traffic, overnight traffic from overseas, and talk to European commands.
Anderson is one of the 24,000 civilians and soldiers who work in the Pentagon. Several hundred of them work here in the National Military Command Center. The center spans several rings near the building's core. The staffers work around the clock, monitoring U.S. troops at home and abroad. On the building's southern side, 57-year-old Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock arrives. He greets his favorite colleague, his wife Cheryl, a 53-year-old administrative assistant whose office is in the building's outermost E ring.
She went into work by herself early. I went into work to my office 2 corridors away. I walked by her office and said hi to her.
18 miles away in Lorton, Virginia, 39-year-old Army Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell gets ready for another day at the office. His wife Mel and their 12-year-old son Matt are still in bed.
I said, goodbye, I'll see you tonight, and, have a great day. She went back to sleep.
In Washington, D.C., U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson arrives at his office, the Justice Department. Today is his 61st birthday. His wife, Barbara, a well-known political commentator, delayed a business trip to Los Angeles to be with him the night before.
Barbara was on the go all the time. I was pretty busy myself, and we tried to do everything that we could to be with one another on any kind of special days.
As he begins work, Barbara drives to Dulles Airport to catch her 8:10 flight to L.A. 40-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Army's Congressional Affairs Officer, pulls into the Pentagon parking lot.
I had a meeting that I had to get to the building early. I arrived at the building, listening to my wonderful gospel music in the car.
A few minutes later, in his second-floor office in the Pentagon's C Ring, Army Career Counselor Sergeant Major Tony Rose sits down at his desk.
Had a cup of coffee, started up the computer, everything was a normal day.
Barbara Olson calls her husband before boarding American Airlines Flight 77, bound for Los Angeles.
We had talked to one another several times a day just to be in touch.
What the passengers do not know is that 5 Islamic terrorists are also boarding their plane. Just a few weeks earlier, the CIA linked 2 of them, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, to the October 2000 bombing of the USS Cole. But they purchased tickets and passed through security with no problems. They are armed with rudimentary weapons, small knives and box cutters. On the first floor of the E-Ring, 30-year-old specialist April Gallup is walking around the Army's Command Control Systems office with her 2-month-old infant son, Elijah.
I was just returning from maternity leave. So I was getting him straight for daycare, doing the paperwork, saying hi to everybody, letting him meet Elijah.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live.
The news flashes throughout the Pentagon that an airplane has smashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. 51-year-old naval budget analyst Dick Reed hears the reports.
You think, wow, you know, that's a real shame. I wonder what happened. I hope, you know, hope it's not too bad.
In downtown Washington, Virginia Senator John Warner, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, has just given a speech in a building near the White House when he glimpses the news on a nearby TV.
I just sort of ran through my mind, you know, we've always worried about those tall buildings that somebody might inadvertently crash into it.
3 miles away, CNN military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre is just pulling into the Pentagon parking lot when his producer calls him and tells him about the crash. He races into the office of one of his military contacts.
Another reporter comes in and says, don't laugh, but my desk is asking, could this be an act of terrorism?
Just a few minutes later, that fear is confirmed when a second attack is reported.
The second plane hits the World Trade Center. Well, immediately, we know it's an act of terrorism.
When the second one hit, we knew that there was something up. This was not, you know, this was not going to be an ordinary day.
Arlington County firefighter Andrea Kaiser catches the news at work.
The first thing that I started thinking was all the stairs that the firefighters were going to have to climb in New York. I was thinking, wow, that's 100 and something stories. They have a lot of climbing ahead of them.
Moments later, the Pentagon heightens its level of alert to Threat Con Alpha. American Airlines Flight 77 is no longer headed for Los Angeles. The 5 terrorists have taken over the cockpit and are steering the jet back east toward the White House. They have disabled the plane's transponder, which helps air traffic controllers to track its flight path. Solicitor General Ted Olson is at his desk watching news of the World Trade Center attacks when a coworker tells him that his wife Barbara is on the phone. She is on Flight 77.
I was first relieved to hear from her. I thought, well, she's okay. But then she told me that her plane had been hijacked.
The call gets cut off.
And I was pretty sure something bad was going to happen.
At the same time, FAA radar picks up Flight 77 heading towards Washington. Officials immediately notify the military. Vice President Dick Cheney is taken down to the command center in the White House basement. Within minutes, 2 F-16 fighter planes take off from Langley Air Force Base in Hampton, Virginia, to try and intercept the plane. They are 130 miles away from the Pentagon.
I have spoken to the Vice President.
800 miles south, President George W. Bush interrupts an appearance at a grade school in Florida.
And I've ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
As President Bush makes his statement, Flight 77 circles over Virginia. The terrorists tell their hostages to call their loved ones and tell them they are about to die. Barbara Olson calls her husband again.
We both reassured one another that everything was going to be okay. And I did tell her about the 2 planes that went into the World Trade Center. I had to tell her that. So she knew, I think, what she was dealing with.
Flight 77 is flying near the restricted airspace above the White House. The 2 F-16 fighters are 12 minutes away. The plane makes a sudden turn west toward the Pentagon. The hijackers drop the plane to under 7,000 feet. At the Pentagon, soldiers and civilians are unaware that a plane is headed their way.
I thought, well, time to get back to my desk.
I took 4, maybe 5 steps out of the restroom.
I sat down to turn on the computer, do the paperwork.
I looked down at my watch and I said, boy, this meeting is going really long.
I reached for my cup of coffee.
American Airlines Flight 77 tears into the southwest face of the Pentagon at 450 miles an hour.
It was just an horrific crunching thud.
Everything sort of went into slow motion. People started falling. I looked out the left and saw the fireball.
The room just got jet black dark. You can just feel this enormous amount of heat. And I could feel it burn the end of my hair, and I just immediately went to the fetal position.
Fire all around me, dark all around me. I eventually cried out, you know, Jesus, I'm coming to see you.
As the third terrorist strike in less than an hour throws the nation into a state of panic, Pentagon employees fight to escape a fortress now in flames. That's next when Minute by Minute returns here on A&E.
Is a volunteer program to honor each American lost September 11th. Find out how you can help in your community.
Minute by Minute now returns here on A&E. A Boeing 757 has just sliced through the Pentagon's southwest wall, killing all 64 of its passengers and crew and gouging a 100-foot wide gash through the E, D, and C rings.
We got planes down. We got planes down. The Pentagon. Heavy black smoke showing.
Flames radiate from the impact site through the Pentagon. No one inside knows exactly what has hit the building. Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell was just feet away from where the plane hit, and his body is on fire.
I accepted the finality of my life. I collapsed to the floor and waited. I began to feel a trickle on my face. I was like, that's not blood, it's not hot. And it was water, the sprinkler system where I had collapsed. I collapsed under the spray of one of the sprinklers.
In the E ring, Army Specialist April Gallup searches frantically in the thickening smoke for her 2-month-old son, Elijah.
I could hear my son crying, but I couldn't see him. I've never felt so many emotions at one time.
One ring away, naval budget analyst Dick Reed shouts to coworkers as they make their way out.
Get away from the windows. Get under the smoke. Stay low. Yell if you need help. Let's go. Everybody out. Move it. Move it.
In the C ring, the explosion has knocked Army Sergeant Major Tony Rose to the floor.
I was dazed. I had lost my hearing for a little bit because of the concussion. I was cut from glass and other things that were flying around.
Army Lieutenant Colonel Ted Anderson kicks open an emergency exit and runs outside. He sees plane wreckage all around.
The smell of the fires, the destruction, the wounded, the casualties, the cries and the screams. It was combat except for the bullets.
Anderson helps carry 2 injured women to safety, then climbs back into the burning building through a first-floor window to look for others. 1 floor up, Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills is with 2 of her colleagues looking for a way out of the Pentagon.
The civilian behind me told me, Colonel Wills, just leave. I can't go anymore. I'm like, no, you gotta go, come on. Just get on my back. I'll put 10 people on, but we just gotta get out of here.
2 miles away, Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock is at a meeting. He gazes out a window to the horizon, where smoke billows above the Pentagon's southern face.
I knew where my wife's office was, and that's pretty daggone close.
Craig races downstairs to the street below and begins sprinting toward the Pentagon. In his office 3 miles away, Virginia Senator John Warner gathers his staff.
I said, I think there's only one thing for you to do, and that's to go to your homes and comfort your loved ones and care for yourselves and your neighbors.
At the Justice Department, U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson is glued to the TV, hoping for word on Flight 77, his wife Barbara's plane.
There had been what they first characterized as an explosion at the Pentagon. I was pretty sure in my heart what it was.
We have a report of a plane crash somewhere in the air.
Arlington County firefighter Andrea Kaiser pulls into the Pentagon's south parking lot.
I remember getting my gear on and putting everything on, and it felt like I was moving in slow motion. It was like a twilight zone, and there's just a lot of, you know, smoke and fire, and I just remember thinking, I don't think I've ever been so afraid.
In the E-ring, Army Specialist April Gallup finds her infant son Elijah buried in a pile of debris. He is alive and unharmed. With the help of 2 soldiers who have come looking for survivors, Elijah, April, and a few of her co-workers climb over the wreckage and out of the office.
And we would pass Elijah, pass the buck. So I could crawl over, we would pass him back. The other person would crawl over, pass him back. They crawled over.
They escape outside. 1 floor up, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell struggles to rise. He has burns on over 40% of his body.
I could never fully get to my feet and stand up. I could take a step or 2 left, right, fall, take a step or 2, fall.
6 colleagues spot him through the dim firelights. They carry him out to the triage center in the A-ring.
I could see that look in the eyes of doctors that this guy may or may not make it.
In the Birdwells' suburban Virginia home, Brian's wife Mel and son Matt catch the news of the explosion on TV and realize that Brian's office is one of those on fire.
We prayed he was, running an errand somewhere, but just not in his office. Because looking at the building, I mean, there's fire coming out the windows of his office.
The rest of the nation watches the live TV coverage, shocked that the headquarters of American defense has been attacked. The FAA shuts down the national airspace system. More than 4,000 airborne planes are ordered to land. For the first time in history, all flights are grounded. At the Pentagon, smoke and searing heat from the burning plane fuel hinder Sergeant Major Tony Rose from finding trapped colleagues.
Petroleum burns at about 2,100 degrees, and because it's an oil base, it's very, very thick, so it's heavy and hard to breathe. It's hard for your lungs to process it. We were actually crawling on our stomachs.
Meanwhile, Marilyn Wills is crawling through her second-floor office with coworkers, looking for a window.
And I just said, God, I cannot see anything. I know the windows are here. I can't see, God. Please show me.
Wills suddenly glimpses a faint light.
And so I said, God, that must be it. And I crawled like a crazy person. And we finally got to that window.
But they can't break through the bomb-proof glass.
I'm starting to think, we crawled this long way and we're gonna die right here because we can't get out of a window.
Outside in the south parking lot, Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock ends his 2-mile sprint from Rosslyn, Virginia, back to the Pentagon. He eyes the flames and wreckage.
Well, it's the building that I worked in for, so many years. My wife had worked there for, 15 years. That was our building. It just kind of was surreal.
He volunteers for stretcher duty, hoping that his wife was out of the building when the plane hit.
At the Pentagon, a plane or a helicopter has crashed.
19 minutes after the attack, CNN correspondent Jamie McIntyre goes live with his first report from inside the E-ring on the Pentagon's northeast side.
Just as they're about to come to me for my first report, I see my home number pop up on the caller ID on my phone. So I quickly grabbed the phone, I just said, "I'm okay," and I put it down, and then I went and did my report, and that's how my wife found out that I was okay.
There is a lot of confusion here at the Pentagon. It appears that something hit the Pentagon on the outside of the 5th corridor.
McIntyre's report is cut off by chilling news.
Wow.
And some
Jamie,
people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion.
The south tower of the World Trade Center is collapsing. And the terrorists have yet another plane under their control, United Flight 93. The plane is turning toward Washington, D.C., and will throw the area into panic.
Where is it, Josh? Get back! Get back! They got another inbound plane! Josh! Everybody get back! Get back!
Minute by minute, we'll return here on A&E. On A&E. "23 minutes ago, A Boeing 757 smashed into the Pentagon's southwest wall, killing all 64 of its passengers and crew and setting the building ablaze. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers are trying to find their way to safety. Army Sergeant Major Tony Rose has just escaped to an outdoor driveway when he hears cries for help inside. Without any protective gear, Rose and about 15 colleagues take turns tunneling through the crumbling wall of a flooded utility room to reach the survivors.
We had to work in shifts because it was so hot. You could go in and pull debris out for about a minute or 2 minutes. Then you had to get back out and just try to breathe. I was scared to death. I was praying as I moved forward, and it was like, Lord, if you want me to be here, help me, but I sure'd like to turn around and go the other way.
Dodging live electrical cords dangling from the ceiling, Rose helps dig a 3-foot-wide tunnel into the smoldering office. 7 people are pulled back through the tunnel out of harm's way. Despite his guards' attempts to escort him to safety, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld heads to the impact site.
He went down to the area of the attack and helped in some way with the evacuation of the injured and others, and tried to restore a sense of calm.
But panic is gripping the country. The D.C. area is being evacuated. The site of the nation's capital under assault, coupled with the horror of the World Trade Center attacks, is unlike anything the nation has ever seen.
We've got fires at the Pentagon evacuated, the State Department evacuated, the White House evacuated.
Get back! Get back! They got another inbound flag! Josh! Everybody get back!
More alarming news. Another hijacked plane is headed toward Washington. The FAA has ordered all planes to be grounded, but not every aircraft has been accounted for. Inside the burning Pentagon, there are dozens of trapped and wounded. Rumors of more hijacked planes periodically force rescue workers to evacuate the building.
You wanted to get in, you wanted to do your job, you wanted to look, because you just felt like the more time you weren't in there, maybe someone was going without help from us.
Up on the second floor of the Pentagon's E-ring, Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills is trying to break through a bomb-proof window. She and 2 co-workers are slowly being overcome by smoke and heat.
We started hitting the frame with our hands, and it popped open. And so at this point, we're all hanging out like dogs, trying to get some air from the second floor window.
The injured have begun to pour into local emergency rooms. 30 arrive at Virginia Hospital Center Arlington in the first hour after the attack.
Some of the victims were just sobbing and crying and screaming, looking for their colleagues. You know, many of them were in severe pain because of the burns. And it's just, you're trying to keep your composure while at the same time keep your own heart from breaking.
10:10 a.m. 200 miles away, United Airlines Flight 93, the last airborne hijacked plane, has just crashed. Passengers rushed the hijackers and forced the plane down, sacrificing their lives for those on the ground. At the southwest corner of the Pentagon, the building's upper 3 floors cave in on the 2 stories below. Marilyn Wills and her co-workers are hanging out a second-floor window that overlooks a driveway.
There were people below in a smoking area. They looked up and they saw us trying to gasp for air, and they were saying, "Come on, we have you, just jump, we got you." So as I climbed out of the window, I'm climbing on top of men who have just stacked their bodies to make a ladder.
She is brought to a triage area.
I'm hearing people saying, she's dying, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not dying. But I couldn't say it because I couldn't talk. So I can remember trying to open my eyes, but the sun was really bright, so I couldn't open my eyes because it just felt like they had just burned out.
Wills is taken to Virginia Hospital Center, Arlington. Firefighter Andrea Kaiser and her team are back in the building. The fire is raging.
Everything was charred. There was wires hanging. There was no clear pathway that we were walking over. I mean, you knew in your heart that you were possibly walking over victims. You just couldn't see.
Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell, who is badly burned, is brought to Georgetown University Hospital by a coworker.
I had burns down to my ankle, but the doctor was able to put the IV in through my foot. That was the only place she could use because I had crud all over me.
One of Brian's colleagues calls his wife Mel and tells her that Brian is severely injured.
You just holding on to any glimmer of hope that he's, everything's gonna be fine.
But the horrors keep coming. The Second World Trade Center tower collapses, burying thousands in its wreckage. And in the Pentagon, firefighters are risking their lives to try and find more survivors and put out the raging fire. Minute by Minute will return here on A&E. One hour after a Boeing 757 exploded against the southwest wall of the Pentagon, fires are still raging. President Bush is traveling on Air Force One, his whereabouts unknown to the public. Vice President Dick Cheney has been taken to an underground command center. And in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles, businesses are shut down and buildings are evacuated. The fear is that terrorists, having struck New York and Washington, are planning more attacks. Back at the Pentagon, firefighters must check on the National Military Command Center, the nerve center for U.S. military operations worldwide. Combat veteran Lieutenant Colonel Ted Anderson is tapped to lead firefighters to the secure control room. The command center staff is monitoring the nation and the world for more terrorist activity, but their jobs are getting increasingly difficult.
They were starting to take on smoke. They could not evacuate. Their orders were to remain in place.
The firefighters must be certain that the command center remains operational. Ted Anderson leads them in. Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock is outside, helping with stretchers. He still has no idea if his wife Cheryl was in the Pentagon when the plane hit. He looks up at the charred wall that was once her office.
Burning and burning, and I try not to look at that, but every once in a while you look and it's almost like you're drawn to it, and then the fear starts to come.
You knew that if anybody was in that location, that they didn't survive.
Sergeant Major Tony Rose, along with dozens of other employees, is helping any way he can with the rescue efforts. Work with the FBI, recovering body parts.
I saw parts of a small child, and I couldn't fathom why anyone would do this to an innocent child. You can come after me because I'm a soldier, that's what I do, but not innocent women and children.
At Virginia Hospital Center, Arlington, Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills, who led 2 coworkers to safety, is on a respirator. She is suffering from severe smoke inhalation.
I call it a fried throat or charred throat. I had burns across the back between both of my shoulder blades, burns down my knees and my leg.
At area emergency rooms, the rush of incoming wounded has slowed.
All of a sudden we thought, if we're not getting victims, then there aren't any. How many are dead? And it was just almost like a hopeless, helpless, awful feeling.
At police headquarters on Capitol Hill, Senator John Warner, who as a former Secretary of the Navy knows the Pentagon intimately, is watching the news with a group of his colleagues. Finally, he can't sit still any longer.
The Pentagon is where I spent over 5 years of my life, and I'm going to go over there. And someone said, well, you can't. There's just no way to get there. And I said, try me.
Senator Warner gets in his car and maneuvers his way through the gridlock toward the Pentagon. American Airlines has confirmed that Flight 77, the flight carrying Barbara Olson, is one of the 4 hijacked planes that have crashed.
I started making phone calls to my family and Barbara's family and some close friends because I did not want people to discover this information for the first time by seeing things on television.
Back at the Pentagon, a group of firefighters led by Lieutenant Colonel Ted Anderson are making their way through the burning building. Their mission? To ensure the safety of those who are charged with defending the nation in this time of chaos. Those who run the National Military Command Center, located just across the courtyard from the impact site.
We negotiated our way into the NMCC. Everybody was outfitted with surgical masks. They were scrambling. It was chaotic, but it was a controlled environment. People were making decisions. They just looked a little different.
Firefighters test the air quality and decide it's safe for staffers to stay inside. Nell Birdwell, whose husband Brian was just feet from where the plane hit, reaches Georgetown University Hospital. Her husband is unconscious and badly burned.
His head was truly swollen almost to the size of his shoulders. It was just enormous. And it had been, they cleaned his face, and so it was just the whitest white.
Brian has already undergone a round of surgery, but doctors do not know if he will live. Virginia Senator John Warner is driving his car over Washington's 14th Street Bridge when his phone rings.
And I picked it up. It was Rumsfeld. He said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, Rummy, I'm on the bridge, and I cannot believe what I see. The flames coming up out of the building where I'd spent so much of my lifetime, and the smoke billowing for miles." He said, "Well, hurry up."
Location. We're told also that Secretary of State Colin Powell...
5.5 hours after the attacks began, CNN airs a statement made by President Bush at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
At the Pentagon, CNN's Jamie McIntyre is continuing his live reports.
Back here, the fight goes on to put out the fire inside the Pentagon. The heat from that blaze was described as absolutely intense.
I remember thinking about the enormity of the tragedy that was taking place and how much the world had changed and how things were going to be different, the whole loss of innocence that was being experienced that day.
As many as 800 people are feared dead. No survivors have been found for hours. The Pentagon has been officially named a crime scene by the FBI. No one is allowed to drive out of the parking lot. Lieutenant Colonel Ted Anderson leaves the site with a colleague and takes the subway home.
I'm sure we smelled horrific of jet aviation fuel and everything else. I mean, blood and soot, and nobody said a thing to us. Nobody said anything to each other. People were scared and just lost in their own world.
Specialist April Gallup is receiving treatment for her injuries at George Washington University Hospital. Her infant son Elijah escaped unharmed.
I was like relieved, like, man, I'm just glad to be your mom. I was making so many commitments to him, like, you know, hey, I'm gonna be the best mom that I can be.
Virginia Senator John Warner has snaked his way through traffic and now joins Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld at a press conference in the Pentagon briefing room. Their message: the U.S. military will not back down.
We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all.
I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow.
I assure you, the Secretary of Defense, when he walked into that press conference with complete command of himself, his emotions and his thoughts, he delivered a brilliant message.
Rumsfeld's promise, however, will prove to be no small task. Though under control, there are still fires in the Pentagon's southwest corner. Next, a nation tries to recover from the deadliest terrorist attack in history. Where were you on September 11th, 2001? Tell us at ane.com. As day becomes night, millions across the country watch as rescue teams try to find any survivors in the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. The details are becoming clearer, and a suspect has already been named.
It begs the question, if not Osama bin Laden, then who? Then who?
President Bush addresses the nation from the Oval Office.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong.
Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock returns home. There is still no sign of his wife, Cheryl. He knows there is little hope that she is still alive.
I ran inside the house, and I just told my son, I don't want to talk to anybody. Locked myself in my bedroom, and I just threw myself into bed and cried, and I just yelled at God. I was mad.
Physically and emotionally exhausted, Solicitor General Ted Olson decides to try to get some sleep. In his bedroom, he finds a note on his pillow. It's from his wife, Barbara, one of the passengers on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She wrote it that morning before leaving for the airport.
It's like as if she was speaking to me. She was speaking to me, but it's after I knew that she was gone. It was quite something. It sort of stopped me cold.
September 12th, 9 a.m. True to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's word, the Pentagon is open for business, but it's not business as usual. Firefighters continue to douse small fires, and troops guard the hallways. Several thousand Pentagon employees show up for work.
You could smell the smoke, and you were stepping on the grime, and there were squads of soldiers walking in the halls with rifles.
The building is full of smoke, and you don a surgical mask, and you go about your daily chores.
And there is plenty of work to be done. The priority? To figure out America's response. At Washington Hospital Center, Mel Birdwell sits by the bed of her husband, Brian. The lieutenant colonel, who was mere feet from where the plane hit, was severely burned. After hours of surgery, he is only barely lucid, but he will survive.
It was just the most exciting thing to see those beautiful green eyes again, and to know that, you know, he was coming back to, and that he was going to be able to communicate with me, and that was incredible.
At Virginia Hospital Center, Arlington, Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills, who was injured leading her coworkers out of the burning building, wakes up and sees her husband, Kirk.
I opened my eyes and I saw him, and then I grabbed for his hand, and I just held on to his hand. I started to cry. And he's like, you wouldn't stop crying. And I told him, I said, because I didn't think I'd ever see you. I just never thought I'd see you again.
Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock, whose wife Cheryl was in the Pentagon when the plane hit, gets the phone call he's been dreading. His wife is missing and presumed dead.
It's something that your mind says, you know, I understand. I know that she's gone, you know. Because you feel it in here.
The firefighters now have the fire under complete control, and President Bush visits the Pentagon. The White House press office has told the media that the plane that hit the Pentagon was originally targeting the White House. 2 days after the attack, the Defense Department announces that 125 civilians and soldiers died in the Pentagon. In addition, 64 passengers and crew died on Flight 77. In New York, there are thousands more dead. The actual total will not be known for months. On October 7th, the U.S. begins airstrikes on Afghanistan with the intent to destroy the force behind the September 11th attacks, the Al-Qaeda network led by Osama bin Laden.
Jamie McIntyre is there at the Pentagon right now, where he was 1 month ago today.
1 month after the terrorist attacks, the Pentagon holds a memorial service for all who perished.
Judy, it's just on this field where there have been so many ceremonies of pomp and circumstance, there's just a very quiet sadness that can be felt here today. Judy?
Jamie, I know it's difficult for you.
I've never had an occasion where my emotions showed through on the air. I mean, you try to be professional. So just the enormous sadness of it overtook me.
October 11th was a very hard day. But as I walked in, there were 2 Army officers that were walking in at the same time. And I just got too emotional. I just could not stop crying. And they were assuring me it's okay. You know, we're all going through this, but you're going to be okay.
In the year following September 11th, there have been no major attacks on U.S. targets, although the government maintains the threat of another attack remains elevated.
We must reconcile ourselves that we're never going to go back. That's a line of departure, as we say in the military, 911.
For those who survived the assault on the Pentagon, life has continued, but it has not returned to normal. Chief Warrant Officer Craig Sincock, whose wife Cheryl died in the attack, created a website called Pentagon Angels to help those who lost loved ones. A few months after the attack, he made good on a dream he and his wife had long discussed.
Cheryl and I had always wanted to have some old car that we could drive around after we retired, pick up the grandkids and go to the shows and just have fun with. So I bought a trailer and towed it all the way back to Virginia. And I've driven it a few times. And it's like I've got her as a co-pilot now.
Brian Birdwell spent nearly 3 months in the hospital. He received the Purple Heart. He is still recovering from his burns. With the help of his wife, Mel, and his son, Matt, he is making progress.
He is a hero because the things he has gone through are unimaginable. I'm just looking forward to the day that his life isn't consumed with physical therapy and wound care, and that he can just be Brian again.
We'll live a wonderful life, and Mel and I will enjoy each other's company with our children, our son and grandchildren for a number of years to come.
Sergeant Major Tony Rose, Lieutenant Colonel Ted Anderson, and Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills all received medals for their work helping people to safety.
I'm not a hero. I'm a survivor, and if you were there, you would come out with me, regardless.
People ask me all the time, you know, do you think about this? Do you have scars? Blah, blah, blah. No. No. Honestly, in the beginning, I was working 15, 16 hours a day, and it just left me with exhaustion. That was my therapy, and I think that got me through the hump.
1 month after the attack, Army Specialist April Gallup also received a Purple Heart and counts herself lucky her infant son Elisha was not injured that day.
Getting your medal is very important as a soldier, but to me, it was a testament that I was alive and my son was alive. So I was happy that I was alive to live to be his mother, because he's my award, he's my reward.
Like black smoke set against a perfect blue sky, the memory of September 11th remains for these survivors and for an entire nation, a haunting mix of horror and heroism.
Now I know the vulnerability that the other countries feel. I feel that now.
If I could have gotten my hands around certain people's necks that day, I would have gladly broken their neck. And even now, I feel those urges because of what we saw.
It is very easy to feel angry. I think I've focused my energies into surviving, moving forward with my life, doing the best that I can.
This country is united at all levels to deal with it, accept the risks, stick out our chin, and go on about our business. We're not going to let these people who want to take their hatred out upon us defeat us in any way.
Minute by Minute, brought to you in part by United Methodist Church.
I pray for safety.
Geef mij de genade.
Gib mir die Kraft, mich mit dem Bösen auseinanderzusetzen.
I pray for a change in angry hearts.
No matter how you pray,
Die zornigen Herzen,
or where,
Pour la sécurité de tous.
the people of the United Methodist Church are praying with you.
In God's name we pray.
Oh, Becky, look.
They've been playing hits for 35 years, but not like this, by phone, fax, or internet. It's Chicago, live by request, tomorrow at 9/8 Central. Now, Third Watch is next on A&M.
Pennsylvania, not far from where that flight